Hello, and welcome to the Pittsburgh City Council's post agenda for Wednesday, April 17th, 2019. My name is Louise Chris, and with us today is Logan Showalter, our sign language interpreter. The state of food insecurity will be discussed during today's post agenda at the request of Councilmember Deborah L. Gross. Thank you and have a wonderful day.
Hello and welcome to Pittsburgh City Council's post agenda on food insecurity. Today is Wednesday, April 17th, 2019. My name is Deborah Gross. I am the Chair of Land Use and Economic Development. And today we're here to discuss the state of food insecurity in the city. And we have a panel here to inform us about kind of what it is that's happening on the ground now. And I think one of my particular areas of interest that I think the speakers will be able to speak to is that for us at City Council, it's hard for us to keep track of the changing environment with federal programs and state programs and which programs are at risk when we see budget changes happening in Washington, D.C. or in Harrisburg, and how we might anticipate kind of describing your programs to us and trying to meet the needs, fill these gaps in food insecurity in the city, and what we might be aware of to either advocate for or to make up for if we are losing support from other levels of government. Okay, with that, I would like to start with Shelley Danko-Day with the City of Pittsburgh. And Shelley, what's your current title? If you could identify yourself for us.
Hi, I'm Shelley Danko-Day. I'm the Urban Agriculture and Food Policy Specialist for the City of Pittsburgh. I'm in the Division of Sustainability and Resilience in the Department of City Planning.
Great. What do we need to know?
Well, food insecurity. What is food insecurity? Food insecurity is essentially defined as the inability of people to obtain a sufficient amount of healthy food on a day-to-day basis to lead a productive life. In the U.S., food insecurity rates are about 12.9%. In Pennsylvania, it's 12.5%. Allegheny County, it's a little higher at 13.7%. But in the city of Pittsburgh, our rate is over 21%. That's more than 1 in every 5 people, or 63,000 Pittsburgh residents. And this is a map showing the concentration in red of the food insecurity in the city of Pittsburgh. The whole map, all of the areas of the city of Pittsburgh have some food insecurity, but these are just highlighting some of the worst, highest rates. So why is there food insecurity? There's essentially 4 reasons. Food availability is one of them. The past century has seen an explosion in the amount of food produced in the U.S. as a whole. However, that food is not always equally distributed, and what is distributed is not always of equal quality. In the 70s and 80s, cities were happy to allow capitalism to take care of the food distribution, and that didn't work so well. Neighborhoods where populations dropped, grocery stores left, leaving communities without a place to buy food and creating what we know as food deserts. And then there's food access, lack of ability to afford the food when it is available, even if there's a grocery store close by. There are a lot of state and federal programs, or a number, I should say, of state and federal programs that help with SNAP and other stuff, but they heavily depend on local nonprofits, like many on the panel here, to implement their programs. So one of the programs, and often the programs are also underutilized. So I'm sure Just Harvest can talk about the number of SNAP eligible people that aren't even signed up. And then there's food utilization. Making healthy choices is really difficult when your funds are lacking. Processed food is cheap and easy, especially if you're lacking a refrigerator or a stove. Your options could be limited. Water quality can make food preparation difficult as well. Oops, a few slides there. So the last thing is food system stability. Our food travels a great deal to get to us, many miles. The large growers are in California and Florida, and climate change is going to make that a problem for growing, never mind transporting. But the distribution system has led to a lot of waste through that distance. Plus, like I said, we need to consider the future trends like climate change and how that will affect the aspects of the food system from the growing and the transportation and the distribution. So food insecurity leads to a lot of health consequences, such as diabetes, heart disease, and obesity. The rate of obesity in the city of Pittsburgh is higher than the national average. Adults with diabetes is higher in Allegheny County than the national average. And adults with heart disease is above what the state and county are. And in addition to these health problems, children are even more at risk for their future. Hunger causes developmental impairments for language and motor skills, affects their social behavior, and causes behavioral problems. Hunger is a real thing, and this often leads to children having to repeat a grade as early as elementary school. So what the city and I have been doing in my work around food has been relatively limited. We improved the urban ag zoning code to make it easier for residents to become more self-sufficient, to be able to grow produce, raise chickens, ducks, goats, and bees. We created the Adopt a Lot program and the Vacant Lot Toolkit, which allows residents to access, or anybody really, to access city-owned land for food, flower, and rain gardens. So it's free land. In the future, what's going to inform our future work are 2 reports around food issues, particularly around food insecurity. That's the Farmers Market Study, which just came out this spring, and the Feed Pittsburgh report, which is still in its draft form. So, as we know, cities cannot function without the basic essentials of human life, especially air, water, and food. And that was Morgan in 2014.
Wonderful.
Thanks.
Thank you. That really frames some things for me. I'm not going to make lots of comment in between speakers, but to kind of put these things into the buckets of, like, some of these are macro issues and some of these are micro issues. Some of them we can do more about, some we can do less about, but in some ways we can do what we can even to counteract some of the macro effects. So that's different. Now I've got a different kind of framework, so thank you. Why don't we just go down the line now? Ms. Bay, do you want to talk a little bit about, does that make sense for everyone if we just kind of go down the row? I don't know if these are in any other sequence.
Sure, is my PowerPoint available?
Oh, yes. Was that one of the ones we're working on? Oh, hello. Do you want to just introduce yourself first for me?
Yes,
Thank
my
you.
name is Rockweed Bay. I wear many hats. I am the founder and executive director of the Black Urban Gardeners and Farmers of Pittsburgh Cooperative. We're based out of Homewood. I am also the co-director of Mama Africa's Green Scouts, and we're based in the uptown section of the Hill District, more specifically Soho. And I work for Grow Pittsburgh as the Garden Resource Coordinator for the Garden Resource Center.
Excellent.
But I'm here to talk to you about food insecurity and mainly the work that we have been doing in the Black Urban Gardeners and Farmers of Pittsburgh Co-op. We definitely believe in being self-sufficient and self-reliant in our community because we can't always wait on people to help us, and more particularly the city and the government to help us. So, okay. All right. So in 2011, some friends and I, along with our children, we wanted to teach our children how to grow food. And living in the uptown area on Moultrie Street, where our garden is, it's the Harry Orlando Community Garden. It used to be a barber shop, and in 2007, we had a tornado on Fifth Avenue, and it knocked the barber shop down. And a nonprofit called Landslide Community Farm, who I volunteer for, they built a community garden. I noticed no one that looked like us was there except for one people, so we asked, could we start a garden in there, and we did. And our goal was just to teach our children and other children how to grow food. Uptown is a food insecure area. And it was more important that our children see us growing food because they weren't seeing us growing food. They were seeing non-people of color grow food. So moving forward, after many years, in 2015, we started the Black Urban Gardeners and Farmers of Pittsburgh, and we had our first meeting in Homewood, June of 2015. And we identified objectives that we wanted to work on. And definitely, I know a lot of people say food insecure, food deserts, but we say food apartheid. And we say food apartheid because it is a systematic system of institutionalized racism. We haven't had a we haven't had a grocery store in Homewood since the 1990s. We do, however, have corner store, as Shelley talked about, where food is processed and it's expensive. Yet we end up November 2016 getting a Family Dollar. It's not in Homewood anymore, but originally it was. It has been rezoned to East Hills without community support or knowledge. So this is what we deal with. Family Dollar is the essential base of a food desert area. So one of the things we wanted to do, we wanted to remedy that food apartheid issue. So in talking, what neighborhood were we going to work in? Homewood. Most of us are from Homewood, live or work in Homewood. What do we want to do? We want to open up a farmer's market. We would like to eventually open up a grocery store, and we need a farm in Homewood. So we were grateful enough to work with Shelley in the adopt-a-lot process, and we acquired 31,000 square feet of property on Monticello Street near Westinghouse High School, and that's a picture of it. And community gardens and farms are important. Number one, for so many reasons. You turn blighted space into something beautiful. It's a source of food for the community, and the community interacts there. These are some of the reasons why. 48% of the Homewood residents worry whether their food will run out before they have money to buy more at the end of the month. Homewood is an underserved community, so when things like lack of a grocery store, that makes situations worse. Because you have to travel outside of your community, if you can, to go grocery shopping. That's a sign of a food apartheid community. We wanted to make sure that equity was impossible when addressing food access, because even though some residents might receive food services such as SNAP assistance, there are very few options in Homewood for that at the time. So one of the reasons we decided to go with a hoop house model is because with this model, we can grow food all year long, even in the wintertime. So last summer, we had our hoop house built, where we have a 30 by 48 foot hoop house on Monticello Street. We're very proud of it. We're going to start next month building the beds inside and growing food. We already started with our seedlings with one of our partners, Phipps Homegrown. One of the things that we did in Bugs is we initiated the Homewood Food Access Working Group. This came out of the Homewood comprehensive collaborative plan where action teams were set up, and one of the action teams were sustainability, which I chaired. And out of that action team, we broke up into many different groups. Shelley was in one was food access, water, air quality, blighted lots, and so forth. But we decided to keep the food access working group going along. In Bugs, we initiated that. It consists of Operation Better Block, Oasis Food, Just Harvest, Grow Pittsburgh, and the Pittsburgh Food Policy Council. Also, Pittsburgh Food Policy Trust. Also, the Harambe Backyard Market. We, last summer, collaborated with them to form a farmers market in Homewood, and we're going to start it again in July. It went well, and it's going to get even better. So basically, the Homewood Food Access Working Group came out of this plan for Homewood, which will be released on the 23rd. Many community residents, unfortunately, do not know about this. No one came back to some of us chairs and asked, hey, what can we do to add on to this? This is why injustices are happening, especially in my area of work of food insecure areas. No one asked us anything. We found out about it, and we also found out that the Homewood Collaborative did not want steering committee members or those who chaired teams such as I did to know about it either. So we have an issue with that. It's not fair, it's unjust, and it's not dealing with equitable concerns for the community of Homewood either. It really is a joke. Moving forward, in creating our urban farm, which is called the Homewood Historical Farm, it's very important to us that community members have a say. I can't stress this enough. We know what we want. We know we did a farmer's market. We know we're doing a community cooperative grocery store that is going to be led by community members and residents. But this is very important to us. We can say we want to build a farm, but without community engagement and community input, it means nothing. And I hope that other organizations can learn from that. And during our farmers market, we were able to produce fresh fruit with our partners with Grow Pittsburgh and Phipps Conservatory, Operation Better Block, to give to the community, and it was on a monthly basis, and it will continue on a monthly basis. This is what I mean. It was a collaboration of work that we all got together and work to make sure that we can provide produce to the community. And when things are done like that, it's liberation for everyone. When you're getting people's input, when you don't have insidious methods and not letting the community know what you're doing, it's liberation for everyone. So, in Bugs, we're always dealing with issues. We deal with issues. We're all activists. To be a member of our organization, you have to take up a social justice issue, and it's always the issues. And sometimes it's issues within our own community. Land access can be an issue. Sometimes organizations coming in with a white savior mentality can be an issue. Get mad because we're initiating a grocery store in our community where we live, where we're from, can be an issue. But we're madder. We're not going anywhere. Black farmers aren't going anywhere. We're going to be in our communities, and we want our children and our elders to see us continue to do this work in our community. Malcolm X had a quote, and it goes, "Revolution is based on land. Land is the basis of all independence. Land is the basis of freedom, justice, and equality." That's very important to us in our community in doing this work, that we have not only a voice at the table, that we are seen initiating this work. And also, we're not waiting for people to help us. The mayor's office has been doing great with reaching out to us, the URA, adopt a lot through Shelley, but there's still a lot of work to do, and I really believe City Council should work more with organizations like us and the work that Shelley is doing to help this food apartheid area, especially in areas like Homewood and the Hill District. Thank you.
Great. Next we have Mr. Regal. You're going to introduce yourself and the work of Just Harvest?
Yes, thanks for having me here, and thanks for having a panel discussion on this topic. I'm Ken Regal. I'm the Executive Director of Just Harvest, a Center for Action Against Hunger, which is a county-wide anti-hunger and anti-poverty organization based on the south side of Pittsburgh. I'm also a city resident living in Highland Park for the last 30-something years. At Just Harvest, our core operating principle is that we should be, as a community, thinking about the hunger problem in the context of human rights and not in the context of charity. That the principle of doing what it takes as a community to eliminate hunger is about acknowledging that there should be a human right to food, that we do not create false dichotomies between deserving and undeserving poor, that in all my years in this work, I have yet to meet a person who doesn't deserve enough food to eat. We should be ridding ourselves as a community and as a city government of the mindset that divides people along those lines and inquires into every aspect of somebody's background and behavior and their life choices in deciding whether or not they are deserving of help. If we think about the hunger problem in a human rights framework, we stop thinking about it as who should receive help from, as Rakib put it, from a white savior, and we think about what it takes to actually have a community that is free of hunger. That means significant changes to how the marketplace for food functions, and it requires significant changes in how the government operates and prioritizes the issue of poverty and all of its surrounding consequences. It is impossible, we think, to unentangle hunger from the broader causes of poverty in the city. If we have a city where housing is unaffordable, if we have a city where, because of state law, the tax system is inherently regressive, if we have a city where people work for a living and still come home with a paycheck that leaves them in poverty, then we're already losing half the battle. We are allowing the conditions in which hunger is more or less inevitable, and where we have given too much power to the marketplace to decide what people are going to be able to do to feed themselves. So, as the city embarks or continues on a process of thinking about what it will take for the city to eliminate hunger, we should be thinking in terms of what government action is already accomplishing, what government action could be accomplishing that it isn't accomplishing currently, and the extent to which we leave ourselves at the mercy of fundamental failures in the marketplace. So as we think about the government role, the first thing to acknowledge is that the main response of the government in the United States to people not having enough to eat are transfer programs. Food stamps, or SNAP as it's known officially, school meals, the WIC program, and a handful of smaller programs. In Allegheny County, and it's hard to tease out of the state's data exactly what the numbers are in the city, but in Allegheny County there are right now about 146,000 people who receive food stamps. It provides benefits that go into the local food economy of $18 million each month in buying power that people spend on food. Because our commitment as a nation has been to do a little bit but not enough to alleviate hunger. The volume of that swamps charity. It swamps what the city government is able to do, but it is sorely inadequate. It does not meet the food needs of the people that it helps. There are significant participation gaps among people who, for many reasons, are eligible for food stamp benefits but don't receive them. And there's a lot of confusing and conflicting research about what that gap is. What we do know for certain is that in the state of Pennsylvania, close to 1 out of every 3 people who applies for food stamp benefits gets turned down. And it's hardly ever because they make too much money. It's almost always because of some problem with verification documents or with the completion of their mandatory telephone interview from the Department of Human Services that leads to those rejections of applications. So part of what we know objectively about the food stamp gap is that some people who need them are trying to get them. And the system, in its bureaucracy, in its fight to distinguish the deserving from the undeserving poor, in its imposition of rule upon rule and regulation upon regulation, that many people are simply tripped up in that effort. We also need to demolish the myth that this program meets all of the food needs of people who receive it. The S in SNAP stands for supplemental. It was changed from being called the food stamp program partly because Washington wanted people to know that that food stamp benefits are not intended to meet all of a family's food needs, that they are intended to supplement the other resources that you are spending on food. The lives of low-income people who rely on that program to keep food on the table would suggest that if such resources were available, they would spend them on food. But when you spend them on rent, when you spend them on utilities, when you spend them on medicine, when you spend them on childcare, when you spend them on getting to and from work in the morning or at night, or however you can get there, or you spend them on the trip to the grocery store, or you spend those other resources on toothpaste and toilet paper, which you can't buy with food stamps. Suddenly those resources that food stamps is to supplement doesn't go far enough. Similarly, there are gaps in both participation and in the quantity and quality of benefits in the school meals program, in the summer food program, in the WIC program. Of those, the summer food program is the one that the city government has the largest role in. The city operates youth programs and other sites at which summer food is served. And part of the approach of the city historically has been to rely almost entirely on the very slim federal resources that are made available to pay the costs of that program. As a result, the program, and it's not unique to the city by any stretch of the imagination, is often mediocre. That our ability to use the summer food program to make sure that kids eat well when they're not in school is our response as a city and our response as a country in the whole summer food program is sorely inadequate. And so before the city embarks on sort of an effort to develop 100 new ideas, we should get our own house in order. We should be looking at the school system of the Pittsburgh Public Schools to strengthen the school lunch and school breakfast program in a number of ways, and they've made enormous strides over the past generation in improving that program and reducing those gaps, but there's still a lot to be done on meal quality, on the amount of time available to kids to actually eat a meal, on the ability to do business with local providers to keep more of that money circulating in the local economy. Similarly, on the summer food program, the city could be doing much more. When we think about the hunger problem in that kind of framework about what the government is doing, the fundamental question for the city at budget time and year-round in policymaking time is, how does this rank in importance with the other things that the city is doing? If we decide at the end of the day, as a city, if the city council and the mayor's office the administrative departments of the city decide that what we are going to do with summer food, for instance, or with the farmers market nutrition program, is we're going to rely entirely on federal money to make these programs work as best they can. What we are saying to city taxpayers is this urgent problem of hunger in our community is so unimportant that every other one of your tax dollars collected at the local level in wage taxes and property taxes, every other thing we spend every dollar on is more important. And if that is our choice, then let's say so out loud. That's what we are doing without saying so out loud when we decide that only federal money or only the hypothetical new money from payments in lieu of taxes or some system like that from major non-tax-paying institutions in the city are expected to finance a solution to the hunger problem. What we're saying is it's less important than every pothole we fix. It's less important than every feet of road we fix. It's less important than every time we mow the lawn in the city park. It's less important than everything else that the city does. And I think that we no longer have the luxury as a city that has said on repeated occasions that out loud that we care deeply about this problem, that we can any longer justify that kind of it's the federal resources that we have that we will use to solve that problem. That can't be the only tool in our toolbox. We have to regulate against fundamental failures in the marketplace that leave neighborhoods without supermarkets. We need to support the existence of small stores that will be able to meet the fresh food needs and the healthy food needs of the people in their community. We need to lift up those programs, whether it's senior congregate feeding or whether it's summer food for kids or whether it's farmers markets. We need to lift up those kinds of efforts. We need the city government to be a powerful voice on state and federal policy to make sure that state and federal governments are investing the kinds of resources. We need the city to use its bully pulpit to push private sector practices in the direction that they need to go towards fair wages, towards affordable housing, et cetera. And we need to wisely use the economic development resources of the city, which are substantial, to make the kinds of investments that build prosperity in the city from the bottom, rather than hoping that it will trickle down from the top. And when we invest in small-scale solutions in neighborhoods, when we invest in affordable housing, when we invest in making the city of Pittsburgh truly a place that everyone is welcome to live, and every neighborhood is thriving, suddenly the free market will do a marvelously better job at meeting the food needs of our citizens. I would close with the words of Nelson Mandela, who said that overcoming poverty is not a gesture of charity, it is an act of fundamental human rights and justice. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm sensing a theme in our presentations today. We can move on to Mr. McManus. Why don't you just give your own introduction for me? Thank you.
I'm Dennis McManus with Greater Pittsburgh Community Food Bank, where I serve as the Government Affairs Director. And someone is clicking. Someone have a clicker? Yes. Oh. Thank you. And I'd like to begin actually with saying that I largely agree with what Ken just said about really needing fundamental changes if we're ever going to eradicate hunger. At the same time, to quote a bureaucrat, Harry Hopkins, who worked for FDR in the relief effort, said that people don't eat in the long run, they eat every day. And so a lot of our effort, and by the mere fact we have a Director of Government Affairs, I think tells you that we do participate in pushing the government to improve what it's doing, but at the same time, we're dealing with the reality here in the city of Pittsburgh, and I'm going to get a little redundant on repeating some of the things that Shelley said, but where 1 in 5, more than 1 in 5 of our residents struggle with hunger. That's a very high number. That's a very high percentage, and I think it demands the city's attention in many of the ways that Ken outlined. The thing that drives us is recognizing the consequences of food insecurity, and I've put some of those up there that have to do, first of all, with hungry children who are almost 3 times more likely to suffer from poor health. When they become teenagers, they're 5 times more likely to commit suicide. And they're twice as likely to require special education, which, as we know, is a rather expensive service. Seniors, and we have quite a few of them, I guess including me now, in the city of Pittsburgh, are more likely to have similar physical limitations to that of a person 14 years older, 2 times more likely to be in poor health, and 3 times more likely to suffer from depression. Adults are ill-prepared mentally, emotionally, and physically for the work environment and at greater risk for absenteeism and turnover in the workforce. And that leads me to believe a couple of things. One, and this is borne out by the research that was done to create the MAP, the meal gap measurement, is that the causes of food insecurity, if you want to look at what correlates most closely to household food insecurity, the first thing is employment status. So it is important that people get jobs and that people get jobs that pay a sufficient wage for them to be self-sustaining. The second is whether or not they're in poverty. And I would argue, based on just on the health impacts alone, that hunger is both a cause and a consequence of poverty. And the third element is housing status. And so these problems, of course, are all interrelated, but if we could work on the unemployment issue, the poverty issue, the housing issue, it would have a good effect on addressing household food insecurity. At the same time, addressing the food insecurity problem can help us solve some of those others. The next slide, and I only brought 2 slides, but is an attempt to give you, oh, that's right, I have to push it. And that didn't work.
You push the right side.
Oh, there we go. That's why I only brought 2 slides, because we'd be here all day if I had to go through any more. In any event, I wanted to try to quantify for council so you have a sense of the activities that the Greater Pittsburgh Community Food Bank is doing just within the municipal boundaries of the city. And you can see we have 85 pantries, 10 soup kitchens. We have 4 produce to people distributions within the city, which is where we take a tractor trailer full of food once a month and distribute it. It really grew out of the fact that we had a lot of produce, which is a great thing, and this is a way to get it to people while it's still fresh. And I mention those as a grouping because this council has been very helpful over the years in subsidizing our neediest pantries with the community development block grant funds. The other activities you see there, the 60 senior food box sites, that is a federal program called the Commodity Supplemental Food Program, which we administer here in Pittsburgh. We have 22 children's programs, which include after-school and backpack programs, 8 shelters. The city, within the city of Pittsburgh, does the lion's share of the summer food service program. I think the last time I checked, you had something like 70 sites. But that is a federal entitlement program. The reimbursement is a little thin, but we do our best to try to match up sponsors with sites. In this instance, we are the sponsor for those 8 sites. Other programs I want to mention is we recently just took over the Child and Adult Care Feeding Program that was formerly administered by the county, and 15 of those sites within the city. And then I really like these last two. Greengrocer is a relatively new development at our food bank, which is basically a mobile food pantry with the accent on produce, but also access to meats and certain dry goods. And we are constantly adding new stops. In fact, even as we speak, I know people back at the food bank are exploring 2 other possibilities for city stops. And then another program that we hope to grow is the Healthy Food Center concept, where it's basically a food pharmacy. And we opened the first one in collaboration with Allegheny Health Network and West Penn Hospital, where people can get a prescription for foods based on what their condition is when they leave the hospital. And again, given, if you remember the first slide, the link between health and hunger, we think that's especially important. The other thing I'd like to draw council's attention to is I've provided some additional details on each of these so you can see which neighborhoods these programs are active in. And I would just close by saying what we encourage people to do. Well, let me back up a second, because I want to get to something else Ken pointed out, which is, utilizing the tools that we have. And it's absolutely right that the food stamp program, SNAP, if you will, can have the greatest impact if only we made sure people had access to it. And I think that's one of the things the city and even this council can do, is to make your constituents aware that that program exists, point them to where they can get help signing up, and they can do that at the food bank or with the food bank's help or with Just Harvest's help. And also to publicize the availability of those summer food program sites. And the reason I say that is for a lot of kids, their major meal of the day is that school lunch that they get throughout the school year. And then when school's out for the summer, that goes away. And so there's only about 20% of the kids that are getting those school meals who are taking advantage of the summer food service program. And so I think to a great extent, it's a matter of letting people know that helps available. And I'll close with that. Thank you. And thanks for doing this, because I think anything that draws attention to this problem is great.
Pleasure here. All right, so we have our last speaker. We're on time, and I have some apologies from the council members that they weren't able to attend. So we'll just have a little Q&A with just me, if I'm the only one in the room, after we're all finished. So Jennifer, would you like to introduce kind of your program and yourself?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. I am Jennifer England. I am the Senior Program Director at 412 Food Rescue. It looks like they're working on getting my presentation up, but I'll go ahead and get started. I fear I'm going to be a little bit redundant because I think everybody said a lot of really valuable things that I wanted to touch on as well. I wanted to start with the most important thing we can do to reduce hunger is reduce poverty. I think Ken really said it very eloquently, and I'm not going to match that by any stretch of the imagination, but I think that when people think about how they can reduce hunger, what city council can do to support it, you're thinking about traditional methods of addressing hunger like food pantries and SNAP, but things like supporting a living wage and banning the box, which the city did several years ago, making sure that there's access to affordable housing, protecting the LGBTQ community, which is disproportionately faces hunger and housing issues. Those are really critical things that the city can do to help alleviate hunger. In the meantime, as Denny said, that people are not hungry in the long run. They're hungry right now. And so we're also involved in the effort to make sure that people have food to eat while we're working on addressing systemic problems. 40% of the food that we produce in this country goes to waste, which is crazy when there's so much hunger around. We send 62 million tons of food to the landfill every year. If food were a country, it would be the third largest cause of greenhouse gas emissions in the world. And I know we're here to talk about hunger today, but I think we want to look at how food waste is not only potentially a solution to some of the issues of hunger, but alleviating food waste also is really good for the environment as well. As you can see, 21% of our fresh water, it goes into food that we just throw away, as well as 19% of fertilizer, 18% of cropland, and so on. 18% of methane emissions come from food in a landfill. The suggested food waste hierarchy for how to dispose of it: reduce it, feed people in need, feed livestock, anaerobic digestion, compost, and then very last at the bottom is landfill or incineration. In reality, what we're actually doing is the reverse. 97% of our food waste goes to landfills. Meanwhile, 1 in 7 people are food insecure. That's a national figure. As we've seen today, it's much higher in the city. It's also higher among certain populations. In households with children, it's 1 in 5. For female-headed households, it's 1 in 3 are food insecure. Yeah. 300,000 Pennsylvania seniors face food insecurity. So really, you're talking about the sort of 2 most vulnerable populations that we have, children and seniors, and that's where hunger is most severe. Hunger has health impacts. You know, I don't need to belabor this point. We've talked about it a lot, but hunger isn't just a matter of comfort or longevity. It's a matter of chronic illnesses as well. We do a better job of feeding landfills than we do of feeding people. A 15% reduction in food waste, just a 15% reduction, would feed 25 million Americans. If we eliminated food waste globally, we could end world hunger 4 times over. The challenge is that food waste is really highly distributed. This is a map of all the Walmarts. So this doesn't even include Giant Eagle and Piggly Wiggly and Target and all the other outlets for food. This is just the Walmarts. And if you think about how much food is generated at each of these locations, it may not be a truckload, it may be 100 pounds. It's hard to wrap your head around the logistics of taking what is currently being thrown away and getting that to people in hunger. Most of that food that's being wasted is highly perishable. It's also very healthy. It's the produce, it's the dairy, it's the things that have a limited shelf life, the fresh food that people have a really difficult time getting access to. The traditional distribution model for addressing hunger is incredibly effective and has been incredibly effective at making sure that people have a baseline so we're not faced with mass starvation. However, it's not appropriate for smaller quantities of food, for unpredictable frequency, and for food that needs to be consumed right away. And that's why food waste has been really tricky and hasn't been something that we've looked at as an answer to the problem of hunger. Furthermore, access isn't just about affordability. It's also about presence in the community. It can be time, it can be transportation, it can even be energy. If you think about how tired you are after a long day of work, imagine if you've taken the bus to one of your 2 jobs and you've got to pick up your kids from daycare on the bus, and then you've got to take another bus or an Uber or a taxi or a jitney to try to get food somewhere. And you just don't have that in you. Of course, you're going to go to the corner store and you're going to get a Banquet frozen meal, or you're going to go to Wendy's for the $1 meal. And for seniors, a store or pantry within walking distance can still be out of reach. And of course, people with disabilities face a lot of those issues as well. The food pantry system, which has, again, been incredibly effective at providing a baseline for solving hunger. A lot of pantries have limited hours, so that can further restrict people's ability to get to them. And that's where 412 Food Rescue comes in, and that is really the environment that inspired us to do what we do. So we created an app, which I think nobody in the universe doesn't know by this point. And the app allows us to leverage a very large and widespread volunteer base with the press of a button. So we have, at this point, over 7,000 volunteers in our volunteer network. When we have food to rescue, we can put it on our app and it goes out to all of those volunteers, which means that highly distributed network of food waste is now suddenly within reach for our volunteers. We also started rethinking the distribution models to put food within reach of people who need it. We've distributed food to over 450 nonprofit partners. 283 of those are within the city of Pittsburgh. And 75% of those are not traditional hunger fighting organizations. So our largest partner, our second largest partner, I should say, is the Housing Authority of the City of Pittsburgh. We've distributed 64,000 pounds to them this year and 850,000 pounds to them all time.
4 months.
In 4 months, yes. And 850,000 pounds to them in the last, say, 2 years. So that creating those new access points put food within walking distance of over 100,000 more people that previously were not within walking distance of a food access point. We're taking it basically to their doorstep. It's in their community room, it's in the community center, it's at their daycare center. You know, they can go pick up their kids and they can get a bag of groceries when they do that. We did a GIS study. The green areas on the map are areas that we are now within that walking distance of food access based on our new distribution points. So we're taking food that's highly perishable, but also highly healthy, and we're taking it directly to communities where the families are that need that food. Our partnerships with the Allegheny County Housing Authority and the Housing Authority of the City of Pittsburgh really led the way for us and is helping us redefine how to distribute that food. In our 4 years, we've distributed to about 2 million pounds of food to family and senior sites, 2.5 million pounds of food to family and senior sites throughout the county. Donations are placed based on need and the size of the partner location. It's always opt-in. We don't force people to take food so that they're really in control of what they get and how much they get. We don't want to take somebody's food waste and turn it into somebody else's garbage. We provide best practices to the housing sites so that they have a distribution model that works for them, that they have some say over, but that also models best practices that we've learned by working with other housing sites. I'm just going to skip past these because these are irrelevant today. We also work with alternate outlets to make sure that food that is not fit for human consumption does not go into the landfill. That porcupine on top of the 400-pound pumpkin is one of my favorite pictures ever. We don't get to do that very often, but sometimes we do get donations of things that just aren't appropriate for humans. They're not safe, or they're just like that pumpkin would be inedible, and we make sure to keep those out of the landfills too. Our impact. According to the Housing Authority of the City of Pittsburgh, prior to our working with them, they were receiving about 5 to 7 emergency food referrals every month. Since we began working with them, and this continues to this day, they've had 0 referrals. We have ended hunger in the Allegheny, or in the Housing Authority of the City of Pittsburgh, in their words. They've in fact taken their staff donations for their hunger relief fund, and they've turned around and donated that to 412 Food Rescue. We've done both qualitative and quantitative surveys with our end users to find out if the food is being used, whether it's being wasted, and how they respond to it. Because frankly, you know, what we hear all the time is, well, do people know what to do with cauliflower? And it turns out they do. And they're very resourceful. People at all ends of the income spectrum are perfectly capable of figuring out how to cook a cauliflower. And they really enjoy the produce. We've gotten incredible feedback on it. You can see one of common response is that it helps them make food, helps them between checks, it stretches their food budget. So as Ken was talking about that supplemental food benefits, this is another supplement for them. Does not by any means provide the entirety of anybody's food need, but it helps get them through the month. 87% of what we donate is fresh. It's perishable food. Those are the things that are harder to get for people who are living in poverty, and those are also often the things that are most healthy. The majority of our respondents agree or strongly agree that they eat healthier because of our distributions. One of the quotes that I love is, again, referring back to the health impacts of food insecurity. The doctors are telling you to eat healthy, but he can't impact your income. At the end of the month, I don't have healthy left. I have what little left I have left. And so we're able to provide that fresh fruit and vegetable that those people need in order to listen to their doctor's advice and eat healthy. We have distributed, as of December, 5.2 million pounds. I think we're up to 5.6. Actually, that's probably 5.8 million pounds by now, which is over 4 million meals. that is removing 2.8 million pounds of carbon from the environment, equal to over 11 million miles driven by cars. So again, not only is addressing food waste a way to help end hunger, it's also a way to help the environment. So, you ask how to address hunger, how to approach it. And I think it's going to take we're of the opinion that it's going to take a variety of methods. And you've got 5 people sitting here at this table, all of whom are coming from a different sector. And I think what City Council can do is support each of those efforts and find those community groups that are working on the issue like bugs and support them. I think the Food Policy Council and the work that Shelley's done with them has been really critical. There's a food plan being put together as we speak. Looking at that and thinking about what are the various creative efforts that the City Council can support to ensure that as a community we are prioritizing ending hunger and supporting healthy outcomes for everybody. And I'll end there. Thank you.
So I'm trying to kind of compose my thoughts since I'm the only person here to do questions. But I do want to convey that President Krause was very sad that he had a conflict, and Councilwoman Harris spoke to me this morning and said that she wanted to be sure that I mentioned that she would have very much liked to have been here, but she was also double booked. And also, I know Councilwoman Smith would have liked to have been here, but she's been out for several days with a family emergency. So I think those are some of the council members that you've probably worked with before who have shown special interest, and I know I've had these discussions with before. One of the questions I'm going to ask all of you, I feel like is something that I should already know, so I apologize, but I wasn't able to pull the information together while I was in here, and I just don't know it off the top of my head, is how much did we spend in the city budget last year, or have we budgeted for 2019 for the various programs, right? How much are we allocating for the summer program? I want to say we have resources as well. I don't think anyone mentioned the senior centers, which I always like to remind people we're providing 50-cent meals.
Yeah, that would be baked into the city parks budget.
Yeah,
probably.
Yeah, and so if we're I think we should highlight, and so we can maybe work to pull those numbers together and see if we know that we have 63,000 residents and some degree of food insecurity, and how many dollars are we spending per year, right? And what's been our recent history of spending, and see if we know that we're not meeting all those needs, then what more should we be budgeting? I think is one really important question to come out of today.
Can I add that
yeah,
City
absolutely.
Parks has been a really great partner of ours. We've worked with them to rescue food from both the farmers markets and the summer feeding program. So in that way, again, just thinking about what are out-of-the-box ideas for how you can address hunger, making sure that food that the city is providing when it's not used isn't thrown away, that it's actually then directed to the community in another way.
I'm also wondering, since it's helpful in these post agendas to see the presentations all combined for us, and so I'm wondering if there's some opportunity that we can show one of those cross-hatched maps of availability with everyone's data all in the same map. I'm not sure that we've ever provided that at the city level, right? So where everyone's kind of food access points are all on the same map. Jennifer, do you also have that?
Well, no, but the Food Policy Council has been kind of working on that for a couple of years, so
excellent.
we'd love to participate in making that happen.
Yes, also.
We'd love
And
the city's help.
And I'll also mention that Dawn Plummer, the executive director, had a conflict for today, which does happen, but we're grateful to have so many members of the Food Policy Council here. And I've been attending the task force meetings, or someone from my staff. And what's the Food Action Plan Task Force? Is that what it's called?
Yep.
So we look forward to seeing how these, I think, pending reports can help inform not just budgeting but also policy making. I
Yes.
feel
At
like
Grow Pittsburgh, we do have a map. You can go to our website, www.growpittsburgh.org, where you can see where community gardens and urban farms are at pinpoints in the area, which leads me that I failed to mention that community gardens and urban farms are great for food access. Everyone at this table and so many other organizations are doing wonderful work to tackle food insecurities. But as a professional urban agriculturalist, I would say growing your own food helps when at the end of the month you're struggling. And having access to those community gardens makes it better as well. That's why the adopt a lot process and what Shelley has been doing is so important. If we can take a look at that, if City Council can take a look at what she's been doing, she's done a great job so far. It can be better. The thing is, when you have an adopt a lot property for a farm or a garden, you don't know if redevelopment can come and swipe it right from under you. That is the problem. The URA has, which they mirrored from adopt a lot. But you don't have to go through that with the URA's farm a lot program. And in conversations with Shelley and others, I think it should happen to where your farms and gardens, these green spaces, through the adopt a lot process through the city of Pittsburgh, should be able to be secure. There's in North Philadelphia, when you have city land, you have it in perpetuity if you're on a farm or garden. We have done a lot. Shelley has done a lot in her office and position, but we can do so much more.
I just asked a few more follow-up questions then from that line of questioning. But I want to acknowledge that one of my areas of interest is that I really recognize Ms. Bay, and I think I heard your comments kind of echoed in a few of the presentations. You were very clear to focus on both control and ownership, right? Your quote about land control,
Yes.
and their hashtag Black Lands Matter, I think, in their presentation, and to emphasize in even the distribution work that it was a community-controlled effort or community-owned effort that you're working with a food cooperative to launch a food cooperative for food
Right.
grocery store.
So we're initiating for Homewood to have a grocery store, but a community-owned and community-led cooperative grocery store. So we started with meetings in March with community residents and some stakeholders. We have another one on Wednesday, March 15th, with one of our community partners, the University of Pittsburgh Community Engagement Center, from 5:30 to 7:30. We're co-sponsoring their community meeting with them. It's paramount that we know what we would like our model for the grocery store to be, but it's more important what the community wants to see it as. We do have caveats: no soda, no potato chips, no candy, no tobacco products. But other than that, what would you like to see? Because it's important, and the response has been good so far. And we're going to continue these meetings bi-monthly, and then during the new year, we're going to start our membership drive. And the URA in the city of Pittsburgh mayor's office has been wonderful in helping us.
I'm glad to
with this
hear
process.
that. We have I think another theme running through council discussions, and certainly with my constituents, about how to, what we can do as a city and what other programs can be helpful in helping people do lots of kind of cooperative ownership models, right? So we have land trusts that are starting. We started in Lawrenceville. We also have an interest in just kind of like worker cooperatives, housing cooperatives. We had a post agenda recently on employee ownership, which is slightly different when a private company is selling to its employees, and there are tax benefits at the federal level, but can we get them also at our state level? So I think there's a real fruitful avenue of policy here in looking at how we do invest in people. This is kind of how I think of it, right? So kind of people-powered solutions that are very community-based. So I appreciate that. So back to the Adopt a Lot. Shelley, can you tell me how many we've got now? Because from 4 years ago, it was 0. And so
The program started at the beginning of 2016. Now I know exactly how many lots we have adopted out. We have 144 vacant lots. It's close to 12 acres at this point that's been adopted.
144. But as Ms. Bay points out, they're not deeded to those uses, so that they're just kind of borrowed.
Well, if a developer wants the land, unless we buy it, which can be costly, even paying taxes, which is another issue. That's why I Grow Pittsburgh and Allegheny County Land Trust, along with community members such as Dana Harris Yates, who is a management team member for Bucks, started Trolley Three Rivers Allegheny Land Trust Initiative. And there are gardens and farms coming on board because that's a threat. If you can't pay your taxes, you're going to lose your garden and lose your farm. But land access is an issue, especially if you're underserved. You can't afford to buy the land. So if a developer wants it, then we lose a farm, we lose a garden, which takes away food access in the community.
And I think that that's a symptom of a larger mindset, that when we define a lot that's being used by folks in the community to grow food, and we describe it as a vacant lot instead of as a lot that's being used to grow food, we have already set ourselves up in the context of, oh, well, it's a vacant lot. Some developer might want to buy it and build a thing on it. Whether that thing is good for the community or not is sort of secondary consequence. But if we think, and certainly land trusts and other kinds of tools for permanent land tenure are important tools in the toolbox for accomplishing this. But unless we change our thinking about what it means to encourage and empower local food production within the city limits by actually encouraging it, instead of thinking of it as a placeholder until something better comes along, we're going to doom ourselves to failure if we make it an inherently temporary thing in how we think about it and describe it. That if the entities of the city government that actually control the fate of quote unquote vacant land, whether that's one of the public authorities that the city ultimately has some responsibility for, or whether that's the city planning department, or whether that's a corner of land in a city park that's part of the Parks Department's control. If we think about those spaces as things we are going to permanently set aside, and the city's control of them is going to mean that we use these for food production. If our goal is to encourage food production within the city limits, then that's what we need to do. Otherwise, we're sort of talking about it, but not really encouraging it.
Let me clarify then, Shelley, when you said 144 lots have been adopted, but I didn't write down the acres. Was it 12 acres?
It's close to 12 acres, yeah. And can I make a comment now?
Yes.
Technically, the Adopt-A-Lot program was designed for temporary use of the land, but my job is food policy and to improve the state of our food system here in the city of Pittsburgh, and I take that very seriously. And so when that is a very good point, Ken. I will stop calling them vacant lots. They are adopted, cared for
Stewarded lots?
Stewarded
That's
lots,
kind of a mouthful,
yes.
though. Maybe we can come up with something else.
I'll think on that.
Well, and
but
that
the
wasn't
main-
a criticism of you for
Okay,
calling
sorry,
them
I
vacant
do-
lots.
I
It's
do-
a
It's
concern.
kind of a tax status.
It's a
It is.
concern.
It's on the county
It's a
assessment
concern
side.
that while it's your job to get those lots into production, it's somebody else's job somewhere in the city or in the Urban Redevelopment Authority to sell that land off to a developer.
Let me
Yes.
follow that up. So, for example, if we currently have 140 or so adopted lots, that's only 0.1% of all the lots in the city, since there are 140,000 parcels in the city of Pittsburgh. If we were to turn that upside down and say, like, gee, how much, if we want to be resilient and more food secure, how much acreage or how many lots, how much of our parcels would that take of food growing?
I like your thinking.
I'm thinking probably 10% of the land mass,
Right, and if you set that as a goal,
right? So
Then those
we
become successes
have
instead
something like 13,800 more parcels to find to dedicate to food production, hypothetically speaking, right? I'm not going to say that's a permanent number, but hypothetically, if we had set a goal of saying that we know there's a certain percent of acres or parcels that would be needed for us to be food secure, and to have a kind of resilient food system, then let's go find them, right? And so that's a different way. Instead of being in a defensive position, we can set a positive goal of saying, okay, let's talk about which parcels we're dedicating to food. Mm-hmm. And then set about to do that.
If I could revisit the mapping question for a moment. In addition to the great work that the Food Policy Council is doing now, that includes more comprehensive mapping as part of the Food Action Plan, there are also efforts by the County Health Department to map many of these resources. I would caution us collectively as we work on those and other resources, that maps often fail to reflect the fact that not every point on a map is equal. A supermarket that has 80,000 square feet of space and 4,000 different products in its inventory, or 10,000 different products in its inventory, that's open 97 hours a week, is very different than a farmer's market that's open 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours a week, 7 months out of the year, even though because of the work that Just Harvest does, those farmers markets now have electronic capacity to accept food stamps. That our ability to do that is limited by the fundamental limitations of a farmer's market. And so the point on a map that says there's a food resource here between 4 and 7 p.m. on Wednesdays from May to November does not make it the same point as an independently owned corner store that's stocking some produce now, or as a greengrocer stop, or as a community partner of food rescues, or of a previously vacant lot that's now in food production. And so I would just caution us to use maps to draw appropriate conclusions about what is actually on the table for people to use to get the food that they need.
Right. One of the things we've actually talked about that we would like to do, I'm not sure if it's actually feasible, but is to do a heat map, so that when you look at food resources, you can see that. You can see what the true access is in that community, because that's actually a very valid point.
So I'm gonna, I think this has been really great. I just want to remind the members of the public that we have the presentations that you presented and in hard copy, and we can attach those on the City Council's Legistar legislative system. So the session will be there, so they can find it and watch it online at any time, and that these documents will be attached for reference, so that all of the kind of websites that we've been mentioning, if they're in your presentations, they'll be there and available for people if they're trying to write them down at home. Those will be locatable through the city clerk's office. And I'm going to bring it back around, since we have these kind of themes, I think, about kind of identifying what resources are where, and one way that council can be helpful is by raising awareness of the programs for people to enroll in, but also where these kinds of supports are available in communities and whether or not, right? So that we can help to try to fill them in. But also we have this theme of kind of local, hyper-local. It's also one of my favorite things, control and ownership, and I think a greater awareness of how we use land, right? The wonks always talk about land use, and what we prioritize in our spending, but also in our allowable uses on our land, I think, kind of are points that go together. And then going back to the very beginning of the presentation, if we're thinking about this community control and cooperative ownership models, we've talked about food production, and we've talked about kind of food distribution, But I think Shelley's first things we're talking about food availability, food access, food utilization, including food prep, can also be on a cooperative and community model. So that is something that I know that is done in other places that we don't have as much capacity here, where people have basically communal kitchens and collaborative living areas. And this is another way, especially when we're talking about these multiple cost burdens that we know thousands of our households have multiple burdens, right? It's not just that they're housing insecure, they're also food insecure. The child care cost burdens, utility cost burdens are, the definition of poverty, right? Trying to figure out how to make this resources last to the end of the month. And I think approaching looking at things just the other way around and figuring out, I think everyone said it here very clearly, how we can get control of and more resources into the people's hands. They can use these systems that are not the market-based systems, that are the community-based systems. So I really appreciate how these themes are kind of really interwoven, and I feel like we can keep this conversation going to get to better solutions. Thank you all for your work.
My pleasure.
you.
Thank you for
I'm
yours.
going to motion and vote to bring this post-agenda and adjourn.